All right. So after finishing Act 1, after looking at that document about Freudian Jungian theory, not that you have to bring any of that into the conversation, what are things that you feel like you can explain about this work and kind of what's going on? Now, remember, the genre wants you to draw conclusions, and it does not necessarily worry about them being correct. It wants you to walk away with your impression on it. So don't feel like I'm looking for a correct answer here. Anybody feel like they have a place to even start? Something that they noticed, something that stood out to them, anything.
After reading this I felt that estrogen represents more of the id because in Freud's, I guess, structural model, because he's often the one that is like, oh, I want food. Let's stop. Let's kill ourselves, like stuff like that. Whereas Vladimir represents more of the ego because he's the one who provided the food in the first place, and that the ego's job is to, I guess, provide for the id's needs. Yeah.
Okay. There is this bit that you start to go, well, this really seems to work pretty well because you start to notice these trends. Except that then you think about their nicknames. Uh-huh.
What was this?
Gogo and Didi, and you start to go, wait, those are inversed from what the definitions seem to kind of have. And you're going, but you're absolutely right. And you're seeing the clear distinction between how these two work. You do notice that estragon definitely has this kind of way of always being associated with the body. So you mentioned food killing himself. We can also add to this, he gets beat up at the start of the act. He gets kicked by Lucky and bleeds. He has the problem with his foot. And by the end of the act, seemingly switches which foot is the one that's hurt to try to get attention. We notice that those kinds of things. And you're like, okay, that definitely works there. We notice that Vladimir does provide. And we have that. There is an argument made as well that if we look at their nicknames, this actually kind of makes estragon. Oh, wait, I put the nicknames backwards, didn't I? Well, I kind of isolated it so that you had that. That estragon is the ego, Vladimir is the id. And, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. I think what's more important is notice how these two split things up and how they seem to be two sides of the argument. That estragon is very much the body and Vladimir is very much the mind. Consider one thing we didn't list here. Estragon sleeps. Vladimir wakes him up. Estragon attempts to tell Vladimir what he dreamed of, and Vladimir is like, no, I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. Think for a second about how dreaming and sleep works. When you fall asleep, where do dreams come from? I know this seems like a really weird question and kind of silly and stupid because you're like, well, isn't it obvious? It is, don't worry. They come from your mind, right? Your unconscious kind of spools forth. Maybe your subconscious is the better way to say it. Think about what happens to your body when you sleep. Once you hit that certain part of sleep, your body more or less locks. Now, can you move? Can you shift? Can you do? Yeah, you do those things in sleep. But, for the most part, you don't get up and move unless you're a sleepwalker. You kind of stay put. So imagine if the body was subjected to the dreams of the, or the mind was subjected to the dreams of the body as opposed to the normal inverse. Would the mind want to hear what the body actually dreams about? No, and that's why I think Vladimir reacts as strongly as he does. But for Estragon, he says, this world is enough for you. You know, almost that way of why would you not want to hear it? Why would you not want to open yourself to it? So we notice through here, we have this. Think about the end of the act. Did you notice what they were talking about on that second to last page in terms of, you know, Estragon, Vladimir, how long they've known each other? What event comes to mind as they talk about their long friendship?
Esteban tried, I'm guessing, to kill himself in the river,
Yes.
but Vladimir went out and saved him.
So if we kind of posit these ideas of one representing the body and one representing the mind, does it make sense that the mind saves the body from suicide? You know, logic prevails here. It wins one over. It is why it's important to see in these works these two as an interconnected pair. Does it really work for the mind to exist without the body or the body to exist without the mind? It doesn't. And so if we view this relationship in that way, we can start to see how this works, and we can also start to engage these ideas of aging that the work brings up. By the end, we have a definite of how long they've known each other. Pozzo and Lucky, we got ages for. They described themselves being somewhere in the range of 60 to 70. But by the end of Act 1, we have the clear distinction that if these two have known each other for 50 years, they are likely in the same age range as Pozzo and Lucky. So as older people, we talked about what are things that older people often struggle with. Memory, bodily functions. So we notice when Vladimir leaves the stage, there's that ideal of him needing to use the restroom, but he just can't. And, you know, we can get into issues of, oh, he tries to leave, but he really needs the body to be able to do it. The mind stops it. We can kind of pull at that thread a little bit. But we start to notice that this is just as much a reflection of age as well. Because for all of these characters, they are all older and they're all falling apart. Other things that might stand out to you based on even today's reading. Or maybe before we move from this, we said, these kind of labels, do they necessarily matter for which is which? What's more important?
The idea that they are interconnected.
They are. And what's missing?
Superego.
What does the superego represent?
Morality.
Morality. And morality is often formed by what?
Experiences and I guess sometimes religion.
Yes, religion and culture. If you look at your definition on that page, even for the superego, it develops later in life because we have to understand kind of the world around us. It's informed by our cultural views, our religious views, our personal experiences, the things like that. How are we supposed to feel? If the id is immediate gratification, I want it and I want it now. You know, if we go to that food example, I'm hungry. The ego tries to balance out the id by saying, hey, can you wait a second? Whereas the superego is going to approach it and going, you fat pig, there are starving children in Africa that have no food. How dare you think about eating? They're totally there. But we notice here in the play, the superego is gone. Well, consider how that's reflected. Where does this play take place? Somewhere along a country road, but do we have any distinct ideas of where and any features of setting that really distinguish themselves? No, so it's just this like abject, absent space. Time is also kind of nebulous in the work too. So we notice that by removing the superego, you know, we're also removing all those details that would inform it. Who would best represent it in this work? Think. If we notice that the superego is missing, it posits a logical question. What else is missing in this work? If we say that those outside influences are totally gone, we have to notice that Godot is completely absent from this as well. Delve back into your definition of superego. Where do we often find meaning in the world that we live in? Often people find meaning or answers in places like religion. They find meaning through their work, and work is often determined by the society that you live in and the role that you play in it. If they're missing, we start to notice, oh, so this is kind of that idea of man existing in the vacuum. Beckett has built a world where meaning has seemingly disappeared and men are just waiting for it. They don't understand why they're waiting and they don't understand when it's coming, but there's a hope that at some point he will show up. How do we emphasize that hope at the end of this first act?
Message from Godot that I'll come tomorrow.
Yeah, notice that, the boy's entire impression is to basically say, not today, but tomorrow. Did you see what happens when the boy leaves the stage almost instantly? Night falls. We said that night kind of represents that end of day and that end of waiting for them. We've gotten some definition. So once the boy comes, boom, night falls. Notice it falls suddenly. When Pozzo talked about the twilight, he said twilight seems to descend and you don't notice the transition, and then boom, there it is. We actually have it happen here in the work. And if you were to see this on stage, they would do it in the exact same way. They would literally change the lighting that suddenly, have a moon show up, and it's night. Talk to me a little bit about this boy. What do you notice about him? What do you notice? Characteristics, things that stood out, details that maybe you were like, huh. Okay.
Just replying with yes or yes or no sir, pretty much. But he does answer some questions, but it's mostly just yes.
Yeah. Did you notice who talks to him?
But
The mind. How does Estragon react to him?
he's out.
Well, but he's out of the conversation, but why? Why does Vladimir remove him from the conversation? Notice that at first he's very aggressive towards the boy. He's demanding answers. He's not willing to engage in a conversation. It's immediate. What's wrong with you? What's the deal? Well, if we consider how much Estragon has kind of suffered here in this first act bodily, we understand that frustration. And if he represents, that physical frustration, yeah, works. Think about boy and the choice. Why? Everybody else in this play is an old man. Why is a boy the messenger? What are things we associate with boys? Don't say Catholic priest. Had to make you laugh. Everybody's all serious. A youthfulness, a playfulness, maybe an innocence. Look at how he talks. What does Godot do to him, supposedly? Well, to his brother. Oh, but Godot beats my brother. Not me. I don't know why he likes me. All of a sudden, we gain that little bit of empathy towards him. Oh. We emphasize that. And think too, what is it that the boy does and what is it that his brother does? Tend the sheep. He tends the goats, my brother tends the sheep. Start to think about logical conclusions that an audience would draw. You're an audience. We've read the first act. I've told you that essentially, if we can look at this, Godot kind of represents the superego in some ways. He's the absent quantity. We said what the superego would represent societally and what Beckett may be doing here based on our structural pieces of theater of the absurd. To an audience member, What are they going to assume Godot is or represents?
Because of like owning like land and stuff.
Don't go quite that far with it. Think about the abstract. If we said that super ego kind of thing gets informed by morality and society, it often comes from religion. We're talking about this kind of singular figure that seemingly they're waiting for to show up to give them meaning. Most people go, oh, I got it. So Godot is God, right? Like that's it. These guys are waiting for God to show up, but hey, we live in this kind of modern world where meaning has disappeared, and seemingly if God exists, he's forgotten about us. There's no clear sign to it. Oh my gosh, what a terrible thing. Except the word Godot actually comes from the French, slightly. It's modified from the word God, which actually means boot. If we were to invest in names in this play at all, we would have to see some kind of a thing and intentionality. And Beckett is very specific. At times, he is willing to be clear about his intention, and at other times, he's very cagey. So, for example, here we got this play. Everybody seems to have the same understanding. People have asked him, well, when he was alive. I mean, they might still ask him, but they're not going to get an answer now. But for years, they asked him, so it's God, right? Like, it does God. Like, I figured it out. He was always very sharp with them. If I wanted it to be God, the guy, his name would have been God. In the same way, within the first act, both Vladimir and Estragon assume names based on either their response or what they tell. This wasn't in the movie version, but Estragon introduces himself to Pazzo as Adam. And here at the end, Vladimir responds to the name Mr. Albert from the boy. And so there's a lot of people that want to draw this whole God thing. And they go, oh, well, if he's Adam, it's the first man. He represents the body. Okay, here we have a boy and his brother tends sheep and he's a messenger from Godot. Oh, so he's like an angel. Ah, see, I got it. Except that in the French version, in the original version, Adam wasn't his name. He had different names, and Beckett would randomly just change them when he got tired of using the other name. So when he translated it to English, he wanted both names to have an A. Why are we having this conversation if you're like, wait, so you're basically telling me people assume this, then you're telling me why they're wrong and how he's informed it to be wrong, and you're showing me all these trails? Does it have to be God? No. And so for Beckett to come out so strongly and to be like, it's not God. If I wanted it to be God, I would say it. Notice that he's framing that entire statement in the subjective, I. Instead, the purpose of theater of the absurd is to allow audiences that existential meaning and that existential moment. It forces you to draw your own conclusions, to come to your own kind of understandings of how things work and what we see here. So, does it have to be God? But can it be? And this is one of those things where some of you are probably going to throw whatever's in front of you and get really frustrated because you're like, no! I want a definite answer. It shouldn't be that open. It shouldn't be different things to different people. But if you look, that's the purpose of this. We read 50-some pages this week about these two guys that stand by a road. And did they really have anything to present to us? No. Kind of like they said today. Well, that wasted the time. Yeah. Are there times in life that we are waiting for something? That we are expecting something to come and we just really don't know how to occupy our time? I got married at 7 p.m. 7 p.m. So I had to just figure out, hey, what am I supposed to do today? Like, today's my wedding day. I got a whole bunch of hours. I have nothing to do. What am I supposed to do? My daughter was born by C-section at 2:30 in the afternoon. My wife and I sat around all morning and we're like, our life's going to change this afternoon. Like, are we just supposed to go have breakfast? Like, are we supposed to just put the TV on and what? Like, this profound thing is going to happen. Of what? How do we spend our time? What do we do? There are plenty of moments in our lives that we find ourselves like Vladimir Nestergon. We're waiting. We don't quite know why. We think we know. Did you notice even at the end, there's the questions to the boy about, are you the same boy from yesterday? There's the questions once Pazzo and Lucky leave about, were they the same? They've changed. And the uncertainty of, have we met them before? Has this happened before? There's a certain ideal to this, of the situations may change, but it feels like we're just kind of stuck in this thing of waiting. Now, here's where it's really going to chew on you. You ready? How's the audience any different than them? Yeah, think about it. The audience literally is sitting there watching them. We're all waiting for Godot the same way that they are. But guess what? We all know he's not going to show up. So what does that say about us? And the futility of our actions and what we're doing if we're willing to attend a play where we know what's going to happen. And it's all about waiting. And we sit there just watching and waiting. Now it's a heavy thing. There's a lot here. When we come back from break, we're actually going to read Act 2. And you will notice Act 2 kind of brings up some of these ideas about waiting and how situations might change a bit, but not completely. Just some reminders as